Reimagining Success, episode 132.
You're listening to Reimagining Success, the podcast where we help you reimagine your future, designing a life and career beyond the 9 to 5 that allows you the freedom, flexibility, and fulfillment that you've been dreaming of. I'm your host, Anna Lundberg. Now, let's get started on those dreams.
Hello there and welcome back to the Reimagining Success podcast. My name is Anna Lundberg and we are talking about personal brands now. So we've been talking about business models for the last few weeks, and another of my 5 pillars of a sustainable business is building an effective personal brand platform. So to recap the 5 pillars, if you're new to the podcast or if you need a little reminder, the first one is to define what success means to you. The second pillar is to build, develop, cultivate confidence and resilience. So really mindset. The third pillar is choosing the right business model that's going to create that freedom, flexibility and fulfillment that you're after. Fourth is developing that effective personal brand platform, and that's what we're shifting into over the next few weeks. And then finally, designing flexible work-life integration. So for personal branding, and I have talked about this on the podcast before, it may be something that let's talk about branding first of all. It may be that you're very much convinced that branding is important. I think most of us are when it comes to a business or a company. You may even be convinced of the importance of branding, personal branding for an entrepreneur like the Richard Bransons of the world, Elon Musk, Gary Vaynerchuk, Marie Forleo, Amy Porterfield, etc. However, personal branding, and this is one of my, I wanted to say pet peeve, but what's the positive version of a pet peeve? One of my sort of passions, one of my little missions that I have. I believe that personal branding is just as important wherever you are in your career journey. So not just if you are an entrepreneur, I was going to say not just if you're an entrepreneur, certainly not just if you're an entrepreneur, not just if you're a Richard Branson in the world, but actually wherever you are in that career journey. So imagine if you're a graduate just starting out, you are an entrepreneur maybe looking for funding for your startup, you're coming back from maternity leave, looking to come back to the workplace with confidence, come into the right role. Maybe you're emerging talent, top talent in the organization, and you're looking to accelerate your promotion, or you're a senior executive, and many senior executives will work with a personal branding coach. In fact, I've been approached by a number of executives and their boards that have wanted to build the individual personal brands of the team members on that board, internally, of course, within the organization, but also externally. So first of all, of course, what is a personal brand? Jeff Bezos has said that it's what people say about you when you're not in the room. And in fact, next week, I'm going to dig more into what the key ingredients are and how you can really get clear on what your personal brand stands for, what you want it to stand for. However, the point is that it exists whether or not you manage it actively. So it's up to you if you want to leave it up to chance or craft it intentionally. So it might feel a little uncomfortable to think of yourself as having a personal brand. You might not want to get involved. You might just think, oh, well, I'm just doing a great job. I'm performing, I'm getting results. That's all that matters. But perhaps unfortunately, but I think actually fortunately, you have an opportunity to manage this intentionally, to actually to craft the story that you want and to use that to open up opportunities for you. And that's what I want to focus on today. Which kinds of opportunities can it create for you? What can you open up? What future can you make possible if you manage your personal brand? And a couple of stories from my own experience from my early corporate days, I guess. The first one that comes to mind is that I started out at Procter & Gamble in marketing. In fact, I had no marketing experience, so I was very lucky to come into an organization that really taught me on the job. And I had a fantastic team, multifunctional team from, the older German guy who was managing the plant through to my Italian brand manager who was fantastic, who'd previously been in finance, so he'd come into marketing, through to all the other incredible team members. So I really learned a lot very quickly. In my first year or two, did an incredible job. Let's just put it out there. So long ago, I can talk about it without having to be humble because I was a really star assistant brand manager. I started out as an ABM, as we called it, and I was top rated, meaning that we had this sort of normal curve, I guess, across the organization. I was a machine. I executed. I launched 6 products. So I was working on the perfume team. We designed and produced 6 perfume launches that year. I worked really closely with my Italian brand manager, Vincenzo. We worked on coming up with a new brand equity framework and strategy for the 2 pillars of the brand that we were working on, a segmentation, a new launch strategy, and so on, which was really, important work that we were doing. And I did other organizational work and so on. So I got that top rating. However, in the organization, in the sort of career path, we had 2-year assignments. So in marketing, it was then time for me to switch up into a different team. And I was fortunate enough to have lots of people who had worked with me, who wanted to keep me. And that would have been the easy option to stay within that little team, which was a small part of the perfume department, which in itself was a small part of the global department or global office, I suppose, in Geneva, which is where I was working. And that in turn was a small part of the global organization in the entire world, with the headquarters based in Cincinnati in America. So somehow I was savvy enough, not sure where I got this idea from, but to understand that I needed to get exposure to other managers who didn't know I existed, to other parts of the organization, in order to have the opportunity to get promotions in the future, to learn other sides of the marketing process and so on. So I'd been in quite a creative design role, and I wanted exposure to the more commercial media operational side. I'd also been in sort of a cheap point of market entry brand. I wanted exposure to a new luxury brand, and again, a different part of the organization, the other end of the floor. In fact, can you believe it, on the 4th floor, so to the other end of the floor. And luckily, because I was top talent, I then got a great opportunity to move into that organization. And that was a really smart move, I think, for me. However, when it came to wanting to get that promotion, in general, it was sort of 2 assignments as an assistant brand manager, becoming then a brand manager. One of the more formidable, very impressive, experienced managers told me in confidence, I guess, "Oh, are you due to be promoted? I thought you were too young to be a brand manager." Whatever that means, right? I took that to heart. I thought, oh, I'm dressing too young. I'm coming across maybe, I don't know, as being too sort of girly and frivolous, and I don't have the gravitas to become a brand manager. And what the more experienced managers, I suppose, and directors advised us was to act as if you already had the promotion. So, okay, if you were a brand manager, how would you behave? You wouldn't just keep executing as I had been as an assistant brand manager. You'd actually step up and already start taking the initiative, solving problems, and maybe even managing team members and so on, of course, sort of indirectly, because it wasn't a formal direct reporting system in that case. The other part, or I suppose my next assignment, because yes, I was eventually promoted, and bizarrely I was promoted into digital marketing, which wasn't something I necessarily focused on so much, but I had this incredible opportunity in a sort of vacuum. Digital was still very new at the time, and I was fortunate enough to essentially become sort of an internal consultant. I had a manager who was busy on her more important brands, so I was a little bit sort of outside of the main organization. I got to come up with a strategy. I brought a team together. I spent time in an agency, in fact, to really dive into, immerse myself in that world. I traveled to the different offices around the world. I had an amazing trip to New York, very nice. And I came up with a full training capability program and so on. And that was such a good opportunity for me from a big picture career perspective. However, that role was in fact very isolated from the main organization. So from the sort of linear career path, again, my manager wasn't very available, I suppose, to me. I also didn't push for the time. I should have probably been more pushy to make sure that I got her time. But in fact, I ended up quite enjoying sort of withdrawing, and that's fine. I don't need to meet and so on and play that game. However, that meant that I was quite separate from the main organization. When it came to then have my next role, there was an opportunity. Well, in fact, I had hoped to have an opportunity, which I was told didn't exist in that whole sort of phase of my career, I guess, that year, 2013, I actually decided to leave. So I took a sabbatical, which worked out well. There wasn't an obvious next role. And during that sabbatical, as I've explained many times on this podcast and elsewhere, I decided to quit my job and start up my own. Once I'd made that decision, I had in my resignation. It was only then that I found out that the dream role that I had wanted had in fact existed. I mean, I say dream role now with hindsight, I'm very, very glad I didn't get that role. But at the time, it was an exciting role in another country, and that was sort of what I was hoping for. As I said, I'd been told that role didn't exist by my immediate team managers, I suppose. And it turned out the person who did get that role had in fact thought that, we're getting very personal here, but had thought that I would be getting that role, but I wasn't even up for it as far as I was aware. I certainly didn't know that it was available. And this person had the initiative, and good for him to actually approach the right people directly in that team, to not count on, I suppose, his immediate managers and so on to push him, and to actually go straight to that team. And he was a great candidate and fantastic in that role. And again, I'm really happy that I then actually took this opportunity to extricate myself from the organization. I took the opportunity to take all my digital marketing skills and then become an external consultant after those sorts of internal years. However, if I had wanted to, and this is my point, as I've shared a lot of my story there, I suppose my corporate career, if I had wanted to be promoted, continue to follow that linear career path, the ladder progressing up to the higher echelons of that organization, and where it really was up or out, as they called it, I would have had to play the game much more in terms of being visible in front of the right people. And again, I'm talking, and this may come as a surprise to you, because of course I talk about leaving the 9 to 5, but I just wanted to highlight the importance of building your personal brand, even within your organization. Even if you don't think you are going to be quitting anytime soon, really important to start building before you actually need it, in fact, internally and externally. So in my case, I was externally known, I guess, in the organization outside of the perfume department there as a digital expert. I was also externally known outside the company because I was working closely with media agencies, creative agencies, and Google, in fact, Facebook, big, incredible contacts. And that was a fantastic advantage to have when I then left. But from the internal perspective, I hadn't been playing the game and networking as I had cleverly done at the beginning of my career when I was getting exposure to that new team. And one framework that I was told about, I guess confidentially because it was a big bad secret, was PIE, P-I-E. And that was, the P is your performance. So that's, of course, a given that you have to be good at your job. You have to get great results. Otherwise, why would you get that next role or opportunity, promotion, and so on? But that's not enough. There are other pieces of the pie. And the I in the pie is image. An image might seem a little superficial, but it's really the image, that the things that other people say about you. So essentially, I think your personal brand, the image you're portraying, putting across, conveying to other people. And then finally, the exposure, E, because you could have a great image, you could have great results, but you're not being exposed to the right people. And I always found that fascinating when we did, as a manager then, when we all got together to rate and rank our teams, our direct reports of assistant brand managers, you'd hear about people who you just never knew existed, who you were told were top talent. And that may have been true, may have not been true. Of course, we're always really good at bigging up our own teams. Then there'd be other people who were very, very visible, and you would have seen them make a big presentation, you would have heard of them somehow. And it's hard then to disconnect your external view of somebody from the results that they may or may not have got. So it's really important to have that triangle or the pie of P, performance, do a great job, I, image, that sort of more brand side of things, and then E, exposure to the right people. So if you can tease out a few insights of what I did right and what I did wrong, that's great. But let's get a bit more explicit about what are the opportunities that you can create through personal branding. And the first is to be able to communicate your ideas, your mission, your message, whatever it is you're doing, from a small, day-to-day perspective, right up to your big beliefs and the way, the culture maybe you want to drive in your organization if you're more senior, the effect that you want to have, the impact, the influence you want to have. You want to persuade people to invest in something or to give you a promotion, in fact, and to really be memorable for the right reasons, of course, right? So that's one thing that a personal brand can do for you. Oh, I remember Jenny, she did that incredible presentation on storytelling and marketing. Or, yeah, Joe did this fantastic report on the data analysis of blah, blah, blah. You can see it's been a while since I was in the corporate world. But, if you've done a report, a presentation, something very visible like that, that can really help to be memorable, again, for the right reasons, to leave that impact that you want to leave. Another piece, and my boss that I talked about, Vincenzo, was a trainer in this topic, and it was really important to him, and I really valued that, was trust, increasing trust. This is true, of course, as an entrepreneur. We always talk about building the engagement with your audience so that they know, like, and trust you. But again, I think it's really important internally in the organization, with your team, people reporting to you, with your peers, with your managers, directors, and externally as well, increasing trust so that people feel they know you. When I was working in this global organization, we had people all around the world, and until I visited them, in fact, physically, it was quite hard. And that's interesting from the COVID perspective. It was quite hard virtually to build that trust. We didn't have all the virtual sort of call setups. I think we had audio conferencing at the time, in fact, and it was easy to be at odds with people a little bit. There's the global strategy perspective, and then there's the local team, and it might not be as fluid as you'd like it to be. And so if you can increase trust, really build that rapport, that's so important. And the third opportunity, really important, is in fact just that, creating career opportunities. It could be raising your profile within the organization. So in my case, going from one little team over here to become more known across the board, across the whole department, across the whole floor. It could be raising your profile within the company. So again, for me, I was becoming an internal consultant, not just working in the perfume department where I'd been working 6-7 years, but also getting to work with some of our other big brands, like the Pampers brands and Ariel and Duracell, Gillette, and all sorts that I would then be consulting on from a digital perspective. Raising your profile outside of the company within your industry. And that might be via sharing your expertise or speaking on stage, going on podcasts, whatever that might look like. Positioning yourself perhaps in a different sector. Maybe you're looking to change sector, in which case, maybe you're very known and respected in this sector, but you don't have that exposure to that different sector. That's really important. And of course, yes, if you want to go out on your own, to position yourself as a thought leader, as an expert, as someone who knows what they're doing externally, not just within your organization. And so in the coming weeks, that's what we're going to be looking at. So how to do just this, how to build that personal brand and raise your profile. What are the key ingredients? That's next week's episode. How personal is personal? That's something that comes up quite a bit. And it was a question I got that I thought would be important to answer. Do I have to share pictures of my breakfast? Do I have to be my most vulnerable? Everyone says you have to be authentic. What does that actually mean? So how personal is personal? How to use social media. I mentioned LinkedIn there. It's a really important channel, of course. How can you use social media to build your brand? And how do you feel good about it? Because again, I'm sure some of you still have some resistance, feeling a bit icky about the idea of being and having and influencing your personal brand, how to raise your profile, how to boost your credibility, and so on. So lots to dig into in the coming weeks. Do go back right to the beginning of the podcast. I think it's around episode 8 or 9 when I start talking about what is a personal brand and how to find your story. So those are still very much valid. And we're taking this a little bit to another level now, digging into some more detailed aspects of this. But hopefully you're convinced, if you weren't already, of the power of a personal brand, wherever you are in your career journey, just starting out, nearing retirement maybe, and looking for some board consulting opportunities and all the different stages in between. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Reimagining Success with Anna Lundberg. I'm sure you know someone, a friend, a colleague, who could also benefit from this podcast. I'd love for you to share the podcast or maybe your favourite episode with them so that they can listen too. Thank you so much for your support.